Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Gallant Bodybuilding Mountain. And today I'm going to share an advanced technique with you. Now, this is something that, let's just say, the exercise purists won't really like, because I find the oversimplification of stretch and contraction is part of the problem with a lot of people trying to find what works for them. They'll try to do an exercise perfect, assuming that the one template they've been taught is the perfect form, and they have to work their way to that perfect form regardless of how they're built, right? So again, this channel's a lot about that, but really what I'm going to say is something subtle that I noticed when I was training yesterday, that I really, it's so subtle that I took it for granted, that I haven't really shared with you when it comes down to doing certain exercises. And what this is how I manifest the tension in the muscle belly instead of in the attachment or the tendon insertion, right? And one of the things I've noticed is, and you've probably noticed this too, that when you're doing bicep curl, as you straighten the arm, say you're doing barbell curls or dumbbell curls, there's a point of diminishing return where when you straighten the arm at the bottom, you might have more of a stretch, but you actually lose tension on the bicep. So that kind of goes against the constant tension rule, if we're going to say it's a rule, right? But it goes against maybe logic of keeping tension on the bicep. Now, say you're doing a preacher curl and you straighten the arm, but you straighten it all the way. We know 100% that's injury territory. That could be where you're putting too much strain on the tendon insertion, and you could tear or pull a bicep quite aggressively doing that with the wrong circumstance mix, right? So say you're doing heavy weight with extended range of motion, that could be a real issue. But really what these two things are is an attempt to get a greater stretch in the bicep, albeit the wrong way to do it, but it is a way to try to stretch out that bicep. But of course it puts exponential amount of forces on the actual tendon instead of the muscle belly, right? So we know that this phenomenon exists. That's really my point. So what I do when I was doing the incline curls is that I would, straighten the arms down at the bottom almost all the way, keeping a slight bend in the bottom. But because the bicep crosses two joints, when I bring the shoulders back in an incline, right? And then bicep curl, I can actually keep the elbows slightly bent to protect the bicep tendon, but still get a premium stretch in the biceps, because the biceps cross the shoulder joint, and when you bring the arms back, you actually get more of a stretch in the belly. So what I'm trying to say is that there may be a compromise made in which joint that you use primarily to achieve the stretch of the muscle belly. And this can also be applied in hamstring training, right? Sometimes you'll see people do a seated upright hamstring curl, which is great, right? That's a great hamstring curl. But they might not straighten the legs all the way to avoid putting excess tension on the hamstring insertion. But at the same time, because they're sitting in an upright position, they're actually stretching the hamstring in the hamstring belly, right? So you'll notice that there are certain exercises where the muscle that you're trying to train crosses two joints, and one joint might be better to stretch through than the other to get the primary or the right stretch that you're looking for. It's not always both joints totally extended. If they are, that's usually a recipe for injury, which is what I talked about with the stiff-legged deadlift, because you're locking the knees in place. And usually when a hamstring tears, it tears behind the knee, right? It tears in that insertion point. So it's good to keep a slight bend in the extremities in a lot of cases, and not necessarily straighten all the way, especially with using medium to heavier weights, right? So, really what I'm trying to say here is that when the muscle crosses two different joints, one joint might give you a better bang for your buck for the stretch instead of the other, right? So this is a piece of information only for advanced people, honestly, because beginners don't sometimes don't know or can't feel exactly where things are playing out. But based on using your awareness, and if you've been at this game for a period of time, just experiment with light weights and just see, where you feel the stretch. And like I always say, if you're feeling it in the tendon insertions, then that means you're doing something wrong. You're locking the joint too much or you're stretching too aggressively. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you have to give up stretching the muscle. You might want to stretch around a different joint and see what happens. So yeah, I think this was an awesome video. It's pretty genius. Mountain. So yeah, I hope this helps you out in your training. Thanks a lot for watching. And if you want to tune into more stuff like this, tune into the Patreon podcast. It's right here. Only $5 a month to get to tune into a Patreon podcast. And yeah, if you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com. Mountain.